Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 2332 amends just one statute on applications for an advanced voting ballot. The amendment appears on page 4 of the bill towards the end of the statute. And this would apply to any person who is sending...
Supervisor Long, I'm going to have you pause, please. We're not having any sound from our second room, so we're going to have stand by. All right, so we're transferring committee members into the main room here and spreading them out because we are not able to get the audio working correctly. And we're lacking an IT person, unfortunately. He went off to assist another committee. So I believe we have all the committee members now in the main room. So Revisor Long, can you please start over for the purposes of the people who were unable to hear the beginning of your spiel? Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, House Bill 2332 amends one statute in the election laws regarding applications for an advanced voting ballot. The amendment appears on page 4 of the bill at the end of the statute. This applies to individuals who are sending applications for an advanced voting ballot to a registered voter unsolicited. The voter hasn't requested an application. The person is simply sending an application to the voter, suggesting that the voter then complete the application for an advanced voting ballot. In these instances, the mailing must include on the exterior of the mailing and on each page inside the mailer, except for the application itself, there has to be a clear label in 14-point font or larger that has the name of the individual. If it's an organization, the name of the president, chief executive officer, executive director of the organization, their address, and a clear statement required by statute that this is not a government mailing and it is from a private individual or organization. That all has to be clear and conspicuous on the mailer. The bill will go into effect on July 1st of this year if enacted. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, are there any questions for the revisor? The chair recognizes Representative Bourgeon.
Thank you. Just have a question. This seems to pertain to mailing these advanced ballot applications. But if I wanted to, as part of my get out the vote effort as a candidate, drop these applications at the door with maybe some of my campaign literature, would that be allowed, or would I be breaking the law?
The bill is directed to persons who solicit by mail. So these would be mailers arriving in the mailbox of the registered voter. Hand delivered is not contemplated by the bill, but if the committee wills, the bill could be amended to address hand delivered solicitations as well.
Other questions of the revisor? Seeing none. Thank you, Revisor Long. We're going to go ahead and open up the proponent section of House Bill 2332. The chair recognizes Representative Topliker as a proponent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to make sure everybody's on the right bill, the one that the reviser just went through was 2332. So it may be listed differently on your agenda, but Mr. Chairman, if you would like me to go ahead and give this testimony on 2332, I will.
Yeah,
this
that's the hearing that we're on.
Okay. Chairman Carpenter and members of the committee, this bill 2332 is introduced to address voter confusion. And I hope that you all can receive my testimony on this. I sent it. I don't know if it's been emailed to you and forwarded to you, but hopefully you'll have it. If not, I'll make sure I get it to you. But comments have been made by voters that, you know, some voters have said that as many as 9 advance ballots were received by them in the mail. And I'm sure if somebody received 9, there's probably somebody out there that received more than that. But some voters have mistakenly thought that the quote-unquote official-looking mail was sent to them by the county clerk or the election office. And they didn't understand which one of the 2, 5, 9, however many they got, which one was the quote-unquote real one to fill out. And I think we heard some of those comments earlier this session, you know, in one of our first meetings, that people were receiving multiple applications for advanced ballots. And they didn't understand that upon receiving an advanced ballot application in the mail, that it was unnecessary for them to even fill it out if they did want to vote in person. And some actually thought that they were required to fill them out in order to be able to vote at all, because some were pretty official looking, and they thought, well, I don't want to take any chances. If I want to vote, I got to fill this out. You know, people don't know all the laws, and when they get something in the mail like that, they tend to think that it's something they need to do. So sadly, some made mistakes on their applications by either leaving off required information such as complete name, complete address, and signature. And if this happens, the voter could then be required to vote a provisional ballot. This bill would require that the individual or entity who is the sender of an advanced voting application to clearly identify themselves. So, and you'll see in the bill that there's a section of the bill that states 14-point font and the name of the entity, the person who's responsible or entity that's responsible for sending the application to the voter. So the voter knows that this is not a government mailing. This comes from a private individual or a private entity. So that clears up that confusion. So the passage of this bill would, 1, address voter confusion, 2, provide clear identification of the sender of an application to a voter, and 3, reduce the number of provisional ballots that can create an extra burden on election officials. Because I have heard that election officials, when they get these incomplete advance vote applications, they have to, it's a big burden. They have to go look each one up. Most of them don't have the manpower, the staff to put all the extra time in clearing up mistakes. And most of those mistakes, I believe, come from third-party applications, some of the third-party people, entities sending those applications don't even complete, they try to help the voter, but they don't complete the application correctly. Sometimes they leave the signature off. So they try to help the voter, then they end up leaving the signature off. Don't tell the voter that we didn't put your signature on there. So that voter is going to be flagged as a provisional ballot. And so anyway, this bill clears all that up. Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you for your testimony, Representative. I will ask that you provide maybe a clarifying comment. At the beginning of your testimony, you said that people were receiving 9 advanced ballots.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Did you mean 9 advanced ballot applications?
Applications, sorry, yes.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. All right, committee, do you have any questions for Representative Topliker? Representative Dodson.
This is really on some of the language down at K. It says, any person who solicits by mail a registered voter to file an application. So that mailing may or may not include an actual advanced voting packet. And I'm trying to think some of the things, just like my table mate here, when you're out trying to get people to vote. I mean, there are several ways to do it. You can tell them, I'm going to vote, I'd like you to either vote absentee, you can vote advanced, you can vote in person, those kinds of things. And the same thing happens with like the League of Women Voters when they're trying to get out the vote. So I'm wondering if this is the language we mean, or if it's the actual delivery of the advanced ballot application. Thank you.
Would you like me to respond to that? Or, okay. So is the basis of your question that the difference between mailing and delivering in person? I'm not sure if I completely understand. So is the issue that you're bringing up that it's not through the mail that's the problem, or what is it that you're
let me just clarify. So any person who solicits by mail, so in other words, if I put a 3-page letter together and say, right, here are the things you can do, here are the ways you can vote, and one of those things is an advanced
right, yes,
application. That is not allowed?
Under this bill, it is allowed. It's totally allowed. But the bill requires on every page of that solicitation by mail that somewhere on that page, it should state in 14-point font very clearly that this is not a government mailing. This comes from a private entity or organization, and then stating either the candidate's name or the organization's name if it's an organization that is the Committee for Good Government or whatever it might be, and the address.
This then doesn't require the enclosure of an advanced ballot application. It's simply the suggestion of one.
Actually, this bill refers to the advanced voting application itself, because advanced voting applications are allowed to be sent, prescribed by the law, by candidates, to voters.
Well, this is kind of my point. It says any person who solicits by mail a registered voter to file an application. So if you don't put the application in there, does this item K still apply?
Well, I will, Mr. Chairman, I think maybe we should direct that question to the reviser and see what I mean, the reviser has written this to amend current law, and maybe we should see what the reviser has to say about that question.
Supervisor Long, I'm pretty sure you didn't write this bill, but would you be able to potentially help us navigate the legalese that we're currently interpreting here?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the provision in that subsection K does not expressly require an application for an advanced voting ballot be included in the mailing. So a mailing that simply solicits the registered voter to file an application, even if it didn't include an application, is potentially covered by that subsection K. And that mailing would have to comply with the 14-point font label requirements.
Thank you, Revisor Long. We are going to go ahead and move on to further questions. The chair recognizes Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Toplicker. I've read your testimony. You are spot on about the problem, and I don't know that everybody in this room is as familiar as perhaps some of us, because I think the activity that was going on was not statewide. It was, I think it was localized to mostly urban areas, and what I'm aware of, it was the mailings were to one party only. But in terms of the way you described the problem, that's exactly what I encountered in terms of people being confused. They would get a solicitation, they would complete it, it would go back to the election office, and then a few days or a week later, they're getting another one just like it. And so they would keep filling them out. When I first saw it happening, and and the Secretary of State gets into some detail in their testimony, but I was very suspicious that it was a hoax, and that the where it was returned to an address that was not clearly the election office, and I was afraid somebody was actually setting up a situation where people thought they were applying and it was going to a dead letter box. So I'm getting to the question, Mr. Chairman, please. You're spot on the problem, but in terms of looking at the bill, I'm not sure we get to the solution. So my question is, and I think I know the answer, but I did not see where there's any penalty in here for anybody that violates what's required by the new law. Is there?
That is a great question that, Mr. Chairman, I would refer back to the reviser. I would, when I asked for this bill to be drafted, I was mainly wanting to clear up confusion and the fact that it creates more provisional ballots.
But what I'm saying is, if we were to enact this, and I don't have anything against what's in the bill, it's just it'll fall in the so what category, because the people that were doing this could easily just keep doing it and ignore all these requirements, because as I see it, there's absolutely no consequence to violating those. It says that they shall, but it doesn't say what happens if they don't.
Right, I understand your question. I understand your point. And again, I would just leave that to the reviser to see if we have, if when this bill was drafted, that there was a reference to another statute that covers some of this, and that the penalty or whatever it is might be in that statute. So, Mr. Chairman, I would refer that question to the reviser again.
We will go ahead and push forward. I would just encourage the committee, if you feel like the language is not what it needs to be, make sure you talk to the revisor's office, have amendments drafted or what have you, or even Representative Toplicker, if you feel like you need to go tighten up the language a little bit. If we do decide to work this bill, I would encourage you to have those conversations. Committee, are there any further questions for the proponents at this time? Representative Lehan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to echo Vic's comments. This is really an issue. I actually got one of these as well, and it was very confusing to me. I thought, wait a minute, I don't understand. I've already seen these. So anyway, thank you for bringing this bill. I do think it's an issue that we need to be mindful of and try to figure out.
That didn't sound like a question, so we will
Sorry,
go.
not a question.
Okay, no worries. We will go ahead and the chair recognizes Representative Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd echo some of the previous comments. Representative Toppiker, I think you have identified something that's troubled a lot of us. For me, though, I'm wondering if there might be a little bit more that we could do on this. For me, the concern when I saw these, well, first I had some of the concerns of Representative Miller. Is this legitimate? If someone fills it out, is it going to go to the right place? Once I confirmed that that was true, that was fine. My concern was the duplication of these that you talked about. And so I guess my question would be, would you be open if we work this bill to perhaps having language added that would require them to say, if you have already completed an advanced ballot application for this election, you know, there is no need to duplicate. I don't want to get this too bogged down, but to me, that was the thing that once I determined they weren't sending them to the wrong address and it was legitimate, I just wanted to make sure people didn't know or knew that they didn't have to fill out, you know, a second, third, fourth one of these applications.
Right. Whatever we can do to address the confusion that some voters are having and to reduce the number of provisionals that are being created by that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome, Representative. The chair now recognizes Representative Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about the practice in Sedgwick County of sending out a mailing early on with the application for an advanced ballot and an explanation of advanced ballot by the election commissioner. That has happened prior to statewide election, I think, for about the last 3, 4, 5 years. And I guess that comes down to the definition of person, maybe. But I was wondering how that would work under this bill.
Mr. Chairman, I think if they are an official government election office or county clerk, there would be no need to require anything that said disclosure, not a government, not a governmental entity. So I don't even think that that would be an issue for the any county clerk or election office. That's my answer to that one.
Do you have any follow-up, Representative Bishop?
Yeah, I can see that it would seem sort of nonsensical to require that this is not a government entity if it's coming from a government entity. However, I was wondering if the revisor could opine on that, please.
Not at this time. Representative Bishop, do you have any further questions for the proponent?
No, not right now. I will tell you that I think I received at least 4 of those in the last election, and it was obvious to me. I had already filled out my application for an advanced ballot. So of course I just threw them away, and I did not hear much confusion in my district about it at all. But that's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Committee, are there further questions for the proponent? I will tell the committee that my wife actually received 5 advanced ballot applications from third-party entities, and there was a 6th one that was actually from Sedgwick County. However, knowing the law, knowing who to trust, not to trust, so on and so forth, obviously, directed her to fill out the official county application versus the third-party applications that had been repeatedly sent to our residents. And so I have also experienced what the representative here is talking about, and I believe most of those were from Missouri for my area. So, all right, the chair recognizes Representative Miller.
Representative Toplicker, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Toplicker, would one way to address this simply to be to require the election official to notify the voter, excuse me, when they've received a correct advance ballot application? That way the notice would come back to the voter and they could ignore any further solicitations because they'd have confirmation that it's been received and they're on the list. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative, my understanding is that the Secretary of State's office has developed exactly what you said, that the voter may check in to see where along the line their advanced voting application is.
You can check, but what I was saying was when the clerk or election official actually got the application, if they send a direct notice to, not something that they would have to check, but they just send a little postcard says, we have received and you are currently on the list to receive a ballot in August or November, whatever.
Right. I understand. Of course, that would be, extra postage and everything else and extra manpower, but I'm sure that.
But it might cut out some of the extra manpower that they're now using to keep telling voters who keep calling and saying, I got another application. Once the voter knew that it was in there, then they wouldn't be bothering a clerk again if they're getting additional applications.
Right. Right.
Thank you.
Committee, are there further questions for the proponent? Seeing none at this time, thank you, Representative Toplicker, for your testimony. Are there any other proponents that wish to speak to House Bill 2332? Seeing none, the chair closes the proponents section of House Bill 2332. We are now going to open the opponents section of House Bill 2332. According to my list here, we have a late entry from Rocky Nichols, Disability Rights Center of Kansas, and I believe he's joining us via WebEx. Welcome to committee.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Give us 2 seconds. Now try.
Okay, can you hear me now, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, proceed.
Okay, thank you. My name is Rocky Nichols. I'm Executive Director of the Disability Rights Center of Kansas. We did send in our testimony yesterday, but somehow it didn't get to the committee secretary. We've sent it in several times since then. We're a creature of federal law. The Protection Advocacy for Voting Accessibility Act, or PAVA, requires our organization as the Protection Advocacy System for Kansas to educate individuals with disabilities about their voting rights and responsibilities, including helping them to register to vote and cast a ballot. PAVA was part of the larger Help Americans Vote Act, or HAVA Act. One of the many ways in which we carry out the requirements of federal law is we send every person with a disability who requests our services the voter registration and permanent advance voting forms from the Secretary of State's office. Again, federal law says that as the designated PAVA program under federal law, that we must help people with disabilities register to vote and cast a ballot. For every individual who contacts us, we send them an extensive intake packet, which is a total of at least 16 pages. This packet includes a number of items which are extremely helpful to them. It does include the voter registration form. It does include the permanent advance voting form, because everyone we serve is a person with a disability who's eligible to permanently advance vote. It also includes other forms in it. We have concerns about the requirement of including prominent wording in 14-point type on every single page. It would require us to put that on every single page of our 16-page intake packet, and it would require us to put that information on the envelope that the intake packet is housed in with that disclosure. This is not a government mailing. It's from a private individual organization. Now, I understand that this was drafted as the best of intentions, but because what we do is required by federal law, we're not certain why we should have to put that on every single part of the intake packet, which includes all kinds of different information and will cause a lot of confusion. And as you can see from the intake packet, if our testimony in the attachment has arrived, there's a number of valuable forms of information in there. It's everything from information informing people with disabilities how they could apply for a homestead property tax refund, to telling them how they can get their student loan debt forgiven due to disability, to obtaining free assistive technology. And we include an application for a U.S. Park Service pass that allows them to visit all national parks for free because of their disability. Again, it makes no sense to us why we would have to put on every single page of that intake packet this disclosure, but the bill requires that disclosure on every single page of the intake packet, and it also requires it on the envelope that we would send the intake packet out. We mail this packet, again, to everyone who contacts us, every person with a disability who wants our services, nearly 2,000 people a year. And I'm not sure what the National Park Service would think about us changing and altering their form, because we include the form for people with disabilities to get a free access pass, which allows them for the rest of their life to access national parks for free. I doubt the U.S. Park Service would want us changing their application form and putting something on the application form that's already gone through a long and tedious government approval process. And by the way, if that Park Service application form is altered, they may not accept the application when your constituents with disabilities fill it out, because we will be forced under this law to alter their form because it's part of our packet. We think this causes too much confusion. We'd love to work with the proponents to fix it. We're also a nonprofit, and money's very tight right now with the pandemic. And to save money, we print thousands of copies all at once. We have copies printed already. We'd have to reprint those copies. We'd have to reprint our envelopes. And because what we do is something that's required by federal law, the PAVA Act, which is part of the Help Americans Vote Act, we would suggest that it might be easier just to exempt our organization. We only send this out to people with disabilities. We only send it out to people who we serve, and would be happy to work with you or the committee, Mr. Chairman, on that. One thing we would like to note is that we do not send these out unsolicited. It's only people who contact us to request our services. We tell them about the packet. We tell them it's coming. We tell them what it has. We talk to them about registering to vote. We talk to them about permanent advance voting. And in spite of this, we would have to put this disclosure on every single page of our packet, and we also have to put it on the envelope and have to print off new copies of everything. I'd be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Nichols, for your testimony. Committee questions. The chair recognizes Representative Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I was going to ask you if you sent these packets out unsolicited or to everyone you serve, or just people ask it, but you did answer that question already, so thank you.
All right. Chair recognizes Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, I guess I don't understand the additional burden if you just sent the application for early voting or for a mail-in ballot separate from the rest of your packet. I guess I don't understand why that creates such a huge burden.
We'd have to send an additional document, additional postage, additional person hours. Why do that when we have a perfectly good packet and we're required by federal law to do what we're doing? Why make us send two things in the mail when we can send one?
Chair recognizes Representative Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Nichols, thank you for appearing before us. Representative Collins touched on something I wanted to circle back with you on. Would it satisfy your concerns if the bill was amended to only apply to unsolicited, well, I know our semantics are going to get a little tricky because now we're talking about unsolicited solicitations of advanced ballots. But if there was an exemption for folks who had specifically requested information from an organization, would that put your organization and alleviate your concerns, I guess?
Depending on how it's worked, we'd be happy to look at it. But another option is there's a federal Help Americans Vote Act and a federal act dealing with protection and access for voting accessibility. And you could just exempt the entity in the state of Kansas who carries out the PAVA authority under HAVA from this.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, so before I get to you, Representative Miller, somebody else had their hand up first. Representative Topliker.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this question is to Rocky. Hi, Rocky, how you doing?
Hey, how are you, John?
Good, good. My question is, it sounds like you've included in this packet, which is not in the intent of the bill, but you've included in this packet all kinds of information, like you said, that has to do with parks and everything else, accessibility issues, 16 pages. I mean, a voter shouldn't need 16 pages of information to receive a advanced vote application. And so I'm wondering, first of all, I know you mentioned HAVA a bunch of times, and that you're assisting, you're doing disability assisting and with HAVA, but since you mentioned HAVA, are you in any way a government agency or a quasi-governmental agency?
I think it could be argued we're a quasi-governmental agency because we are designated by the state of Kansas as the protection and advocacy system. There is only one protection advocacy system for each state. We are that in Kansas, and by virtue of having that designation, we are also the official PAVA for the state of Kansas, the Protection and Advocacy for Voting Accessibility. That's a federal law. We perform those duties in the state of Kansas by virtue of being the protection and advocacy system.
Okay, well, I understand. And so I don't think this language would apply to you because if you are a governmental agency, I would assume that it would not even apply to you.
I think it could be argued that we are, it could be argued that we're not. We're also a 501c3 that's organizationally independent of the state of Kansas. Under federal law, the state can't infringe upon what we do and can't try to intimidate us or stop us from doing our work. So we're also separate from the state of Kansas. That's why I think just a simple exemption that whatever entity is carrying out the protection and advocacy for voting accessibility functions of federal law, which is part of HAVA, be exempted from this.
I think you may not even need an exemption because it may not even apply to you, as I just said a minute ago, but maybe if it does apply to your organization, only the part in the packet that refers to advanced ballot applications should have the disclosure. Only that part. And maybe that's something that we could talk about when we work the bill. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to make it clear, I don't think anybody around the table has been referring to Mr. Nichols' organization when we talked about the culprit that was creating this confusing activity. So long as it's legal, and this is a question for the reviser, not to answer momentarily, but before we work the bill. So long as it's legal, I think the easy fix is simply to exempt this entity. I think if we can do that without causing some equal protection issues, let's just do that. Thank you.
Further questions of the opponent? Seeing none, Thank you, Mr. Nichols, for appearing before the committee today. Are there any further opponents on House Bill 2332? I'm seeing none. The chair closes the opponents section of House Bill 2332. We're now going to open up the neutral section. For the first neutral testimony that we have Katie Capal, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Communications and Policy. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you said, I'm Katie Copal, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Communications and Policy for the Secretary of State's office. As with most other bills not introduced by our office, we are neutral on the legislation, but we do believe House Bill 2332 nicely addresses growing concerns with voter engagement in Kansas. It's not uncommon for third parties to engage in voter outreach efforts, particularly in a major election year like we just had. Nothing prevents them from doing so, and most have sincere desire to encourage voter participation. In 2020, Kansas experienced a noticeable uptick in these efforts, particularly as it relates to mailings. And so we offer kind of 3 key observations resulting from some of these efforts. And we say some of these efforts, not all of them. Our first observation is, as Representative Topliker said, not all of the forms will request the required information required by state law, making those forms incomplete. So a voter could think they've submitted all the necessary information when in fact they have not. The second observation, as many of you have already stated, is voters received multiple unsolicited advance by mail ballot applications from third parties, even after they had previously submitted one to their local election office. This created a lot of voter confusion and concern. It also caused a dramatic workload increase for our local election offices, who had to process thousands of duplicate forms while also preparing for a major election in the middle of a global pandemic. And our third observation has to do with the data information that is requested on the forms. There is nothing in state law that prohibits these type of third-party mailings from being retained for data collection purposes. Some of the mailings had return addresses of the organization and not the county election office. So that's just another observation we found as we compared these multiple mailings. One thing I will note is when Secretary Schwab appeared before you all at the beginning of session, we did acknowledge this was an issue, and we are happy to work with lawmakers and interested parties in the event this bill doesn't move forward on continuing to find ways to address the solution. Until then, we will continue to encourage voters to go through their local election office or our office in making any election-related transactions, and we would appreciate your help in doing so. We do appreciate your consideration of this issue and look forward to working with you on the bill. Thank you.
Ms. Capal, committee, we are going to withhold the questions until we hear from all the neutrals. The chair now recognizes Rick Pyfo, chair of the Kansas County Clerks and Election Officials Organization.
Hello, my name is Rick Pyfo. I'm the Harvey County Clerk, and I'm also the chairman of the Elections and Legislative Committees for the Kansas County Clerks and Election Officials Association, with 109 total members, with 105 county clerks or county clerks and then 4 additional election officials. We agree with the intent of the bill for these third-party solicitations. You know, it did increase our number of phone calls dramatically when these mailings went out. I mean, it was a valid application and it was returned or supposed to be returned to our office and not back to them and then forwarded to us. But I had heard that there was an error on some of the return addresses for some election offices, and there was multiples of these received. We received multiple copies of these applications, or multiple applications from the same individuals. When we get those, we look in the system, see that they already have one in. If the information is different, it's updated to the most current. But they would only get one ballot no matter how many apps they returned. Our concerns, so like I said, I agree with the intent. Our concerns is we don't think that this bill specifically allows us to do a mailing. As was mentioned, some counties regularly do advanced ballot application mailings. But this says any person. I'm not a lawyer, but any person would, I think, include me and every other county clerk and every other governmental entity that may want to do an advance application. There was some other entities that had sent out advance applications, like I think DCF maybe did one. But so that's our main concern, is that how could we put on our, even if we did the changes to the 14-point type and everything, which would be difficult to change all of our mail pieces and envelopes and stuff. How could we possibly put on there the disclosure that this is not a government mailing, it is from a private individual, if it's from our office? And then there was a suggestion about clerks notifying. That would increase our workload. I mean, I understand the intent, but there is a means that they can check through Secretary of State's office to set up a voter view that allows them to go online and check. The only issue with that is sometimes it takes a little while to get it entered into the system so that it's visible by the voter. And by that time, they may have received 2 or 3 more application mailings. But there's also a difficulty if we were to send out a notice to everybody as soon as we process their app, that there would probably still potentially be issues with overlap, that by the time they get our card, they may have received 2, 3, 4, however many more applications. And there's an expense to that, and it's not currently an automated process.
We're starting to run out of time here, so.
Okay.
Go ahead and.
I'll stand for questions when appropriate.
Okay, thank you so much. The chair now recognizes Davis Hammett of Loud Light Civic Action Group.
Hello, Mr. Chairman Carpenter, members of the committee. Thank you so much for having me. So on these mailers, the first thing I want to point out is most of the mailers for advanced ballot applications that we saw in 2020, the vast majority that I have documented actually would have already been in compliance with this law. They included that they were not from a government entity. At the bottom, they included in large font what organization they were from, including the organization's phone number, website, which goes beyond this. And actually, as a representative previously suggested on notifying people that their mail ballot might have already been received and how to check it, some of the mailers that I see actually already have that. So first off, I want to say it's not really clear if this bill would have done anything really substantial to stop the mailers that we saw in this last election. I also think it's worth noting just how incredibly unique the 2020 election was, where mail voting was an option that many people hadn't done before, but they were doing for the first time ever. And one of the reasons that these mailers, I believe, came to Kansas is because Kansas was a state that did not have a statewide effort to make sure that every voter received an application. So some counties adopted their own method, right, of contacting voters, and some maybe sent out multiple mailers, but it wasn't a statewide thing. So you had third-party entities knowing that voters might have never been informed of this option that we're sending out the mailers. So that's just something to consider about how did we even get to this point. As far as the Secretary of State goes, at the beginning of this legislative session, Secretary of State Scott Schwab commented on how this was a problem, but urged restraint and caution, saying that it probably deserved an interim committee if we were to really address this, because it does hit on a variety of concerns of how it would impact. I mean, both political parties are engaged in sending this out. There's civil rights groups and different government entities. It's a pretty complex topic whenever you're talking about just restricting a broad restriction on mailers. And the last thing I just want to kind of go off on, I guess, a little bit is just building off of how did we get here? Why were these mailers necessary? What is the real solution to prevent them in the future? Now, it was talked about mail ballot tracking. The thing is, Kansas doesn't really have mail ballot tracking. That is, as Clerk Pifo mentioned, that is a delayed tracking where only once that information is manually entered into the Elvis statewide voter database can people check it. So it was, in some cases, months behind. There are ways to have automatic mail vote tracking where even for the application and the mail ballot itself, as it's being scanned by the Postal Service, it's being updated so people can know this stuff in real time. It's also worth noting that Kansas does not have an official way to apply for a mail ballot online, which could have been seamlessly integrated with the statewide voter database. Again, so people could have instantly been able to check if they had applied for a mail ballot. And then also we had the huge backlog of mail ballot applications, in part because our counties and our local election offices are remarkably undersourced in some cases. And so there needs to be an investment in improved election infrastructure. So again, I don't really think this bill is necessarily a problem. I don't really think it would have changed anything that occurred in 2020. And I think if we really want to address this problem, that this committee should begin exploring things like improving our election infrastructure and making sure that our state's election system is adequate from the very local level to the statewide level. And with that, I'll stand for questions when appropriate. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Committee questions. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For Mr. Pipo. Sir, as I understand it, in Harvey County, the clerk, that county was one of the counties that initiated advance ballot applications to every registered voter. Is that correct?
Yes, we mailed out, separately, we mailed out an advance ballot application to everybody before the primary and then another mailing before the general election. But
And
we
did you-
specifically excluded everybody that had already signed up for advance by mail.
That was going to be my next question. That would be those people on the permanent list.
Yes, and we did that mailing after we processed all of the applications, the single advance applications we had on hand at that time.
So would one way to address extra work by the clerk's offices to expand the opportunity for folks like me who like to vote by mail every election but must apply every election to simply have one request, as we do with people now who do qualify for permanent, and that cuts out a lot of work of the clerk's office, does it not? Because you've already got them, you don't have to keep mailing stuff to them.
That would be a good suggestion, because a lot of them that applied for the primary also applied for the November election, so we had to process 2 applications in that case.
And if they were on the permanent list, you would no longer be required to process any application. They just go on the permanent list.
We enter at one time and they get a ballot for every election they're eligible.
And they would know as well that they were already signed up to get a ballot, and they could ignore 1,000 different solicitations.
Yes, but that was part of the problem with some of these third-party mailings is they didn't exclude permanent advance people.
But it'd
So
be
they
helpful.
were calling saying, well, I think I already get one. Is that true?
Right. Thank you.
Representative Topiker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question to Clerk Pifo. County clerks are a governmental entity. So I don't assume that you would have to put any kind of a disclosure on any of your mailings.
The bill, well, the way I read it, or the bill says, any person who solicits by mail.
Right, but a county clerk represents the county, as you know, and just as a side note, I was a county commissioner in Johnson County for 10 years, so.
Right.
And if you're sending out mail from the county, you wouldn't be required under this bill to put those disclosures on.
Well, if that's truly the case, then I guess we don't have as much of an issue with it. Like I said, just from a literal reading, it says any person, and I'm a person, so if it has my name or my office, then I think I would be excluded, or that I would still have to qualify or meet these requirements.
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe that is the case. And then I had just a comment or a question to Mr. Hammett.
All right.
It's just a real quick question.
Real quickly, because, I'm going to give us 3 more minutes on this until we move to the next bill.
Okay. Mr. Hammett, do you agree or disagree that that organizations could still send out advanced voting applications under this bill?
I agree, and I actually think almost all the applications that went out in 2020 would have still gone out exactly as is. The ones that I've looked at already appear to be in compliance with this bill.
So you agree that this bill does not prohibit anyone or any organization from still mailing those advanced voting applications out? There's no prohibitions in here on mailing the application out.
I do not believe so. I do think for some organization it causes a little bit of legal confusion, right? Like being able to even know these restrictions exist, right? So I think you might have plenty of people who have always done this because they've been able to do this for, I think, about 25 years in Kansas. And all of a sudden now they are finding out that they're, they aren't informed that they're no longer allowed to do it. So that's a concern.
All right. Committee, we're going to go ahead and move on. And I'm going to go ahead and close the neutrals section of House Bill 2332. And we are going to now shift to House Bill 2333. For an overview, the chair recognizes Revisor Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'll be very brief in the interest of time. House Bill 2333 does 3 things. The first is it amends that same statute regarding applications for advanced voting ballots on page 4 of the bill to direct that the county election officer not process any application that is incomplete. So the application would not be processed and the applicant's name would not be added to any of the lists maintained by the county election officer for advanced voting ballots. The next amendment is to the statute that governs completing an advanced voting ballot. That amendment appears on page 6 of the bill, would add a new subsection G to prohibit any person who is a candidate for office from assisting a voter in applying for or marking an advanced voting ballot or signing an application or the ballot itself. Violation of that subsection would be a Class C misdemeanor. Finally, the bill amends the crime of electioneering to expand the crime to prohibit a candidate for office from handling any ballot, distributing ballots, hindering or obstructing any voter, or hindering or obstructing any election board worker. Those prohibitions are lifted from KAR 7-45-2 and are currently applicable under that regulation to poll agents that are at a polling place. The bill will go into effect on July 1st of this year if enacted, and Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Revisor Long. Committee, are there any questions for the revisor? The chair recognizes Representative Bourgeon.
I apologize to the committee. In the room shuffle, I didn't realize that the order of the bills had changed, and I think my question that I asked was better addressed to this bill. And that is, as a candidate, am I allowed to provide or assist my voters, the folks that I'm reaching out to in my district? Can I assist them in getting an advanced ballot application?